Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that touches all our lives, educational testing.
Hmm.
We're going to explore how our understanding of how we actually learn, thanks to cognitive psychology,
Hmm.
is making us rethink if the tests we take really measure what counts.
Right.
Our guide for this is the paper Implications of Cognitive Psychology for Educational Testing by Sungun Baek.
Exactly. And this deep dive is really about getting to the heart of what Baek's work tells us. We'll be looking at the core differences between how we used to think about learning
The old ways.
and how cognitive psychology now understands it. And importantly, we'll see how these different views have a huge impact on how we design and use those educational tests you've probably taken, throughout your life,
All aimed at making learning better, hopefully.
all with the aim of making learning better. That's the goal.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the old school ideas about learning. Our source points out that traditional testing comes from something called psychometrics. Think of it like focusing on measuring who's taller rather than how someone grows. It was more about seeing the differences between people at a single moment.
Yeah, static assessment. And
Yeah.
what's fascinating here is how they pictured you, the learner. There was this idea called tabula rasa, basically. Your mind was seen as a blank slate,
Empty page.
just soaking up whatever the environment threw at it, like experience writing on an empty page. This naturally led to tests focused on, how much information you could just recall.
And then there was another idea, nativism, which is almost the opposite, right?
Kinda, yeah.
This suggested that we're born with certain mental structures already in place, and learning is more about uncovering these built-in frameworks.
Like finding what's already there.
Yeah, our source mentions this, referencing Plato from way back,
Yeah.
the idea that we're trying to get to a deeper understanding that's already somehow within us.
Precisely. Now, what's key to understand, I think, is what these two different traditional ideas had in common. Both blank slate and born with it perspectives saw knowledge out there in the world as separate from you, the learner.
Objective stuff.
Right. It was objective stuff that you either knew or you didn't know. Your job was basically to, grab what you were missing.
So in this traditional view, you are often seen as just a passive absorber,
Mm-hmm.
just soaking up facts and skills from teachers. It kind of makes sense when you think about those old-style tests, right? The ones that just ask for memorized information.
Totally. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of how learning was traditionally seen, it was often viewed as a straight line, one thing after another.
Sequential.
Exactly. You had to master the basics first. And these basics were often taught and tested all by themselves without much connection to, real world situations.
It's like building with Legos one block at a time, sort of.
That's a good way to put it.
You can't build the cool spaceship until you've snapped all the basic pieces together in the right order. So learning becomes this adding on process, mainly just receiving and remembering stuff.
Yeah.
Being a good learner meant you could just take in and spit out the most facts and formulas.
Right. Passive, receptive, reproductive. That was the idea.
Now let's flip the script
Yeah.
and look at how cognitive psychology sees learning and you, the learner. Our source highlights a real shift here.
Mm-hmm.
Studying how our minds actually work became the main focus.
Yeah, big shift towards cognition itself.
And a big idea here is constructivism.
Right.
This is the idea that you're not just a sponge, you're actively building your own understanding of the world
Mm-hmm. Constructing it.
based on these internal rules you create as you experience things. Our source brings up Piaget, saying knowledge isn't just a collection of isolated facts, but comes from how your whole brain structures information.
Exactly. It's about the structure, not just the pieces.
Yeah.
And then we have the novice to expert model, which is maybe a bit more hands-on, you could say.
Okay.
It's less about grand theories. It's more about looking at what someone needs to learn, studying people who are really good at it, the
Yeah.
experts. Watching beginners, the novices, and then figuring out how to help the beginners become experts. The work of Vygotsky is important here.
So what's the common thread in these cognitive psychology ideas? It sounds like both constructivism and the novice to expert view agree that you, the learner, are actively involved.
That's the key. Actively creating or constructing your own understanding of the world and how things work. Cognitive psychologists generally agree that you're constantly building understanding, making sense of things.
Even if you start out wrong sometimes.
Yeah, even if your initial ideas are a bit off or incomplete, you're still building.
This leads to a very different picture of learning then. Instead of just passively receiving and remembering.
Right.
Cognitive psychology sees learning as something active, where you're constantly building and working towards goals. It's about organizing and changing both what you know, the facts, the content,
Declarative knowledge.
and how you do things, the processes, the skill.
Procedural knowledge. That, yeah, Glaser and colleagues highlighted this back in '87, seeing learning as this ongoing process of developing internal knowledge structures that you're constantly testing and modifying.
Testing and modifying. Interesting.
And a big focus in cognitive psychology is on understanding.
Not just getting the right answer.
Exactly. It's about making real connections between different pieces of knowledge. It's about fitting new information into your existing mental frameworks or schemas.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper into this idea of a schema. Our source describes it as a kind of generic representation, right? Like a general way of understanding an experience or a concept, often like a network in your brain rather than a strict step-by-step thing. It sounds like these schemas are like mental blueprints we use to make sense of things and solve problems.
That's a great way to put it. You use your schemas to understand a problem, find ways to solve it, think about it from different angles, and, guide your thinking towards an answer.
Like a tool.
A problem-solving tool, exactly. And the cool thing is, learning, even for little kids, involves actively building these mental schemas. Understanding gets richer as you make more connections between different kinds of knowledge.
So as your understanding grows, your knowledge becomes more connected, forming these solid chunks of information in experts.
Coherent chunks.
Whereas beginners might just have scattered bits of information. It sounds like the goal of teaching, from this perspective, is to help you develop these well-organized and accessible knowledge structures in your own mind.
Precisely. Help you build those rich, interconnected networks. And this really different way of seeing learning from cognitive psychology has some big implications for how we should think about educational testing.
Right, because if learning isn't just absorbing facts, then tests that only measure fact recall are missing something huge.
Exactly. The traditional view often leads to what Whitehead called inert knowledge, stuff you've received but don't really use or apply.
You don't own it.
You don't own it. And it's really hard to assess higher order skills like inference, analysis, deep understanding with just, say, multiple choice tests. They often end up just measuring factual knowledge.
So traditional tests might tell you who has the most information, but not really how expertise develops, or, crucially, how to improve competence. They're kind of inadequate for understanding the learning process itself or figuring out how to help someone learn better.
Yeah, Sternberg made that point quite strongly. And, cognitive psychology just offers a much richer understanding of how knowledge is organized, how we acquire it and structure it compared to when many of our current standardized tests were first developed.
Okay, so let's get into those implications then. What's the first big one?
The first implication our source discusses is that educational tests should be deeply diagnostic.
Deeply diagnostic. Okay, what does that mean compared to traditional diagnostic tests?
Well, traditionally, diagnostic tests mostly looked at content knowledge gaps, what information you were missing, and measured change in terms of quantity, like how many more answers you got right.
Right.
But the cognitive view says we need to go much further. And new diagnostic tests should also figure out if there are problems with how you're thinking and learning your process knowledge.
The how.
And look at whether your understanding is actually changing in a meaningful, qualitative way, not just how many more facts you know. We need to see which thinking strategies help or hurt your performance and look at the knowledge structures that show different levels of proficiency.
So instead of just saying you're weak in fractions, these new tests should pinpoint why. Like maybe you're using a specific wrong procedure or misunderstanding a key concept.
Exactly. Pinpoint the specific process and content knowledge needed for improvement. Give teachers much clearer information on how to help.
And a key way to do this is through error analysis, right? Looking at the mistakes students make.
Yes, precisely. The source mentions work showing that when students make mistakes, they often do so in predictable, systematic ways. They aren't random.
They have bugs in their system.
You could say that. By carefully looking at these patterns of errors, we can diagnose the underlying learning problems.
Our source even gives examples of computer programs like Debuggy, which could find procedural errors in math by comparing your answers to a library of common mistakes, or bugs. And CT-Debug did something similar for signed numbers.
It's amazing technology, really. It could pinpoint the exact flawed rules a student was using, which is incredibly useful for targeted help. And importantly, this idea of looking closely at errors has spread beyond just math to science, reading, language arts, writing.
It's applicable across domains.
Definitely.
Okay, so that's being deeply diagnostic.
Yeah.
What's the second big implication?
The second one is about assessing students' depth of understanding. It's not enough to just know if you got the answer right or wrong.
We need to know how well you understand it.
Exactly. Tests need to use tasks and ways of analyzing them that really get at how you organize your knowledge and how well it all fits together, the coherence of it.
So analyzing the cognitive tasks themselves becomes crucial.
Right. What declarative and procedural knowledge does this task actually require? Good tasks should reveal both quantitative and qualitative changes in your knowledge structures as you learn.
So it's about figuring out the main ideas in a subject and designing assessments around them. And scoring isn't just correct anymore.
Right. Inferring the level of understanding becomes more important than just a simple right-wrong score. This means we need new kinds of test items and new statistical models to analyze the responses.
Like the partial credit model.
Yes, the partial credit model, or PCM, developed by Masters, is a key example. It allows educators to make inferences about different levels of understanding, not just a binary right-wrong.
So you can map the development of competence.
You can map development, identify areas of difficulty, and guide interventions much more effectively.
And then there's the rules-based model from Tatsuoka.
Right, the rules-based model. That's particularly useful for measuring how well your learning skills, cognitive skills, and diagnosing those erroneous rules you might be using in procedural domains like math or science.
How does that work, basically?
Well, it involves constructing items linked to specific skills and potential errors, estimating the likelihood of students using those errors, classifying students based on their error patterns, and then refining the whole system. It's been used effectively to diagnose knowledge of fractions, for instance.
And computers play a role here too, right? You mentioned some specific techniques.
Yes, the source mentions several computer-based techniques for assessing knowledge structures. Things like CONSAT for geology, microcam for various subjects,
MOT for hierarchies.
MOT for hierarchical structures, and the story problem solver, SPS, for arithmetic word problems, focusing on developing schema knowledge.
These sound like really powerful tools for getting a better picture of student thinking.
They really are. They move beyond simple scores to look at the underlying organization and connections in a student's knowledge.
Okay, diagnostic tests, assessing depth. What's the third implication?
The third big implication is that tests should be used to improve learning and understanding.
So tests as an instructional strategy, not just an evaluation tool.
Exactly. The idea is that tests shouldn't just be for grading or selection at the end. They should be an integral part of the learning process itself, used by both teachers and students.
That requires different kinds of tests, though.
Absolutely. It requires richer, denser, more sensitive test designs than, say, just summary, multiple-choice tests used for evaluation. This naturally points towards alternative measurement strategies.
Like performance assessments.
Yes, things like performance assessments. Instead of relying so heavily on standardized multiple-choice tests, we look at things like short answers, showing your work in math, writing essays, conducting experiments, making oral arguments, or compiling portfolios.
Things that show you can do something with your knowledge.
Precisely, applying knowledge. And cognitive psychologists are interested in these alternatives for several reasons. They show application, they can be more closely linked to instruction, they foster more authentic thinking.
Authentic cognitive performance.
Right. They can also value diversity in how students show what they know, and fundamentally, they can be used to actually improve learning. Some even see them as the foundation for a new theory of testing.
Portfolio assessment gets highlighted here.
It's presented as an authentic, continuous, multi-dimensional way to assess learning, often involving interactive feedback and complex scoring.
The example from Hutchins School sounds great, focusing on process and product.
Yeah, their goals were really interesting. Improving understanding, enhancing self-awareness, improving advising, creating a coherent experience, and even improving the academic program itself based on what the portfolios revealed.
And crucially, students and teachers use these portfolios.
That's the key point. Students learn to self-assess, identify their strengths and weaknesses. Teachers gain new perspectives on teaching. It becomes a tool for improvement for everyone involved.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Now, the fourth implication. This one's about validity.
Yes. The fourth implication is the need for new strategies for test validity.
Validity being whether the test actually measures what it's supposed to measure.
Right.
Or the inferences we make are sound.
Exactly. Appropriateness, meaningfulness, usefulness of the inferences from test scores. Traditionally, psychometrics focused a lot on content validity, does it cover the material, and predictive validity, does it predict future performance.
Okay.
But cognitive psychologists emphasize construct validity. That's about gathering all sorts of evidence to support the interpretation that the test is truly measuring the underlying psychological construct, like understanding or problem-solving ability.
So it's a broader view of evidence.
Much broader. They also talk about authentic or ecological validity. Does the test reflect performance in real situations? Are the tasks complex and contextualized like they are outside of school?
That makes sense. A multiple choice test isn't very ecological.
Not usually, no. And standardization itself can sometimes be a source of invalidity across different cultures.
Interesting point. And systemic validity, what's that?
Systemic validity is the idea that a good test should actually cause positive changes in the educational system. If implementing a test leads teachers to teach the targeted skills better, and students actually get better at those skills, then the test has systemic validity.
Wow, so the test itself should improve the system.
That's the argument. It links the assessment directly to positive educational outcomes.
So to sum up these implications,
Yeah.
cognitive psychology pushes us towards tests that are more diagnostic, look deeper than just right-wrong answers, are used during learning, and require new ways to prove they're actually valid and useful.
That's a great summary. It's a fundamental shift from just focusing on test takers' responses, which is central to a lot of psychometric theory, like item response theory, to giving equal weight to the test content, the responses, and the cognitive processes involved. It's a significant departure.
Okay, so moving into the discussion section of the paper, it acknowledges the huge role standardized tests have played, right, for selection, certification.
Oh, absolutely. For the past century, they've been dominant for student selection, managing instruction, and public accountability or program evaluation. Those are the big three traditional goals.
But given everything we've just discussed from cognitive psychology, the paper argues for new goals for testing.
Yes, primarily improving learning itself, helping students acquire better cognitive and metacognitive strategies, and improving instruction, helping teachers develop effective strategies for individual learners.
Which means really integrating instruction and testing.
Integration is key. They shouldn't be separate activities.
And intelligent tutoring systems are mentioned as one way to do this.
Potentially, yes. Using computers for both testing and instruction. These systems could act as a diagnostician, figuring out where you're struggling, a strategist, suggesting ways to improve, or even like a colleague or foil to challenge you.
Sounds futuristic, but the potential is there.
The potential is definitely there, but the paper also stresses something really important. Testing doesn't happen in a vacuum.
The real-world context.
Exactly. We have to consider the real society, the political, practical, cultural conditions. Misusing tests, like applying them inappropriately across different cultural language groups, is a real danger we need to guard against.
And the content of the test needs to align with what we actually want students to do, right? Not just bubble-filling skills.
Absolutely. The source warns about the negative consequences of teaching to the test when the test is just multiple choice facts. You might get better scores on those factual items, but performance on tasks requiring reasoning and deep understanding might actually suffer.
Which is why those alternative, authentic assessments are so important.
Right. They aim to capture the demands of critical thinking and knowledge integration that are needed in real life, not just in the test setting.
The paper even suggests test situations could involve new learning, with scores based on applying that new knowledge. That's really different.
It flips the script entirely, doesn't it? Testing as a learning opportunity itself.
So where does this leave the relationship between the test experts, the psychometricians, and the learning experts, the cognitive psychologists?
The paper suggests it's becoming more symbiotic, potentially fruitful. They have different goals and different strengths. Psychometrics brings rigor in measurement and objective assessment.
Which is still important.
Definitely. Especially given that some of these new cognitive approaches can be expensive, time-consuming, labor-intensive, and face challenges with reliability.
So it's not throwing out the old, but finding a synthesis.
Exactly. There's optimism for a future synthesis, combining the strengths of both approaches to ultimately benefit educational testing and, most importantly, student learning.
That sounds like a hopeful note to end the main discussion on.
I think so. It acknowledges the challenges, but focuses on the potential for improvement.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive,
Sure.
the key takeaway seems to be that cognitive psychology offers some really valuable insights that could, well, revolutionize educational testing,
Hmm.
shifting the focus from just assessment, from just measurement, to using tests as a tool for actively improving learning and understanding.
Yeah, it's a call for testing methods that are more diagnostic, that really probe the depth of understanding, that are instructionally relevant, and that we validate in new, more meaningful ways.
It's about making tests work for learning, not just measure it after the fact.
Precisely.
And on that note, here's maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As learners ourselves, in everyday life, how can we take these ideas about actively building knowledge, seeking deeper understanding, making connections, and apply them to our own learning journeys?
That's a great question.
Regardless of what formal tests we might face, maybe just take a moment to think about how you learn best.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like you're actively constructing something? Where do you find those opportunities to really engage with new information and make it your own?
Food for thought.
Definitely. Thanks for diving deep with us today.